Black Phone 2. Not the Black Phone 2, by the way. Drop the. It's cleaner. The newest Blumhouse sequel, the newest Scott Derrickson sequel. The last time we had a sequel to one of his horror movies was Sinister 2, which I really wasn't a fan of, but he did not direct that. I was a fan of The Black Phone, but I really wasn't sure if it needed a sequel. Luckily, we do have Scott Derrickson returning this time along with C. Robert Cargill. But I mean, look what can happen with Blumhouse sequels. Did you see Megan 2.0? I saw that shit. So I really didn't know if a sequel was necessary, and I don't usually watch trailers, but I watched this one because I needed to see what it was they were going for, and the trailer actually completely sold me. The tone, the Nightmare on Elm Street vibes. So here we have it, The Grabber has returned. How was it? Let's start by talking about all the things I enjoyed about Black Phone 2. And first of all, yeah, this is heavily influenced by Nightmare on Elm Street. Some people might say to a fault. There are certain things here that are definitely directly carried over from that franchise, but considering we aren't gonna get a new Nightmare film for the rest of my entire goddamn life, apparently, I'll take what I can get. We have not had Freddy on the big screen since 2003. 2003! But I do think if you were going to make a sequel, this was the right thing to do. While there was nothing left hanging in the first film that required a sequel, the supernatural was established, the existence of ghosts that can interact with people were established, so when you killed the main villain, the idea that he can still be around as a ghost makes sense. So the Grabber is now inhabiting these visions, these dreams that allow him to interact with people from beyond the grave, and it kind of scratched that Freddy itch while still feeling like it has its own identity. There are certain rules that it abides by that are different than Nightmare. There are certain visual things that it does differently. I do think it's its own thing. But those sequences were great, especially visually. I love the look of this film. I love the setting. Snowy, cold horror is something that really appeals to me a lot of the time. So having them isolated in this snowed-in camp, I think just looks beautiful. And then the dream sequences are filmed in this really grainy, like Super 8 style, which we know Scott Derrickson can pull off from Sinister. And it just gives those sequences their own unique identity. It makes them really eerie, like the low budget look of them makes them feel more real, and that really helps with some of the brutality in the movie because this is definitely gorier than the first one. We know kids were getting killed, but we mostly saw them as ghosts after the fact. Here we see in some of these visions shot in this really realistic looking style, some of the kids going through some shit. Like, they don't hold back with what they show us happening to these children. Sometimes a sequel upping the gore can feel like they're doing it just because they feel like they need to, but this one, it actually felt very effective. And because the Grabber almost exclusively appears in those sequences, shooting him with that different style gives him this different kind of eerie quality that he didn't have in the first one and makes him feel like a different presence posing a different and stronger threat this time. Because in the first one, it is pretty simple and it's pretty predictable. Finney's in a room. The ghosts are trying to tell him how to get out of the room. And occasionally we cut over to Gwen. And obviously you can't just repeat that, so I like how this one does feel different. And with the Grabber being dead already, the threat feels a little greater because he's more of an overall presence rather than one guy in one house with one kid. And it was a little more unpredictable. I wasn't really sure exactly where it was going to end up because we're not dealing with a human villain anymore. What exactly can you even do to him? And Ethan Hawke is still great as the Grabber. I like the slightly different version that we get here because now he is this greater presence and also someone who has suffered defeat and is feeling vengeful. And Ethan Hawke has to show a lot of that through just his voice, because he's wearing the mask pretty much at all times. There are times when he's on the phone, or it's just his presence being felt, and he has to portray a lot with the way he speaks, and he was really good. And of course, Mason Thames and Madeleine McGraw return as well as Finney and Gwen, and they were great. I thought they were really, really good in the first film, and they just continue to be good. I'm really enjoying following along their careers. They have some really emotional scenes. The movie really takes its time to show us what these characters are like a few years later. Finn has kind of taken the trauma from that first film and funneled it into anger, trying to kind of make himself seemingly feel tough and detached to kind of ensure to himself that something like that will never be able to happen to him again. And Gwen is really dealing with these intense visions, and she's almost the main character. They both get a lot of focus, which I really like because they were separated in the first film, but here it's pretty evenly divided between them, and Gwen really gets a lot to do. And that makes sense because the grabber is supernatural now and she's the psychic one. I'd say they're basically co-leads, but she is really driving a lot of the plot forward because she's the one experiencing these visions. She's the one in more direct danger a lot of the time, and I really care about these characters. Her potty mouth has returned in beautiful fashion. There's one character in particular who's just kind of a douchebag that we don't like, and Gwen really lets her have it. We got some great laughs out of her. I like the way their relationship develops and they deal with their trauma from the first movie. They have these really emotional scenes. Their performances are really good. Madeleine McGraw especially has a lot to do. She has a lot of these scenes where she has to be scared and crying, and she really sells it. And even their father has had a little bit of an arc. I wasn't fully satisfied with the ending of the first movie because their father was so despicable in that film, and by the end we're kind of meant to assume, like, I guess he'll be better now. And I'm like, I don't know if I can fully believe that. But now that this movie is set a couple years later and we actually see that their relationship with their father has evolved and progressed, that actually improves the ending of the first one a little bit for me. I'm like, oh, okay, he actually stopped drinking and they're actually progressing now. But I like that they don't entirely forget that that's what he used to be like. It is mentioned explicitly, and you can just tell by the way the kids talk to him. They're clearly still on edge a little bit around him, and especially with Gwen's body language when she's talking to him and when topics that dance around the supernatural come up. Just the way she kind of moves her body a little bit, the way she behaves, shows that that trauma is still in her and that she still has that fear that he might resort back to his old ways. So I like that that is still acknowledged, but there has been progression there amongst the family. I think this might be Scott Derrickson's best work purely in terms of direction. Like I already said, I really enjoyed the choice to make the dream sequences this really grainy footage. I also really enjoyed a lot of the camera work. There are ways in which he'll spin the camera around to reveal certain things, like something won't be there, and then the more the camera moves, the more it shows things that weren't there before. To get into some of the things that I didn't like, even though I enjoyed this direction for the grabber, I think it's the best thing they really could have done if they were making a sequel. It's a shame that he's kind of lost a little bit of his identity. Like when he had the different masks in the first film and he had a different demeanor depending on which one he wore, that's gone, which makes sense. It would be weird if he was changing masks as a ghost, but that was one element that I did enjoy, and now he's just kind of more of a Freddy-esque being. I think it mostly works, but a little bit of his identity is lost. There were a couple jump scares that I didn't think were very necessary. Not many. I think it might have literally only been 2. But the first one was like the lamest attempt at a jump scare I've ever seen. I was like, Scott Derrickson, you've been doing this long enough. You can do better than that. I didn't even blink. Not a single muscle on my body moved. It was very ineffective. The second one was effective. I jumped, but it felt pretty cheap. It was just a loud noise, and I'm like, I really like this setting. I like the directing style. I love the visuals. I like the way you're presenting the villain here. There's a lot of eerie quality to this whole scenario. You don't really need to rely on the loud noises. Luckily, it was only a few times. It takes a while for the grabber to meaningfully appear, and I was getting kind of concerned about that. Luckily, once his presence is fully felt, I really enjoyed what they did with him, but especially because we were taking a bit to build up to him, I was expecting there to be a little bit more in the story that I wasn't able to predict. I was expecting maybe some twists and turns, and the way it fully pans out, why they're at this camp, why Gwen is having these visions, what they need to find out happened in the past, It's all incredibly straightforward. Like, if you've seen the first film, you know what the grabber does, and it's that. It felt like there was really room in there for some kind of twist to surprise me. In fact, I know there was room for a twist because there actually was one, but I really didn't like it. So it's like, yeah, I wanted a twist, but not that one. They do discuss Finney and Gwen's mother a little bit more, who was mentioned in the first film, and they're trying to form connections to the past with what's happening now in the present. And for the most part, I thought that stuff worked. It was good enough to get us a reason to have a sequel, but they take it too far. They do certain things that I'm like, that's a retcon. They're trying to add on to things from the first movie, change things from the first movie that did not need to be added to and did not need to be changed. And it just doesn't feel sincere. It feels like, well, we made a sequel, so we have to introduce a new idea, so let's make some shit up. And it really didn't work for me. When they mentioned it, I was like, no. And as they kept mentioning it throughout the movie, I never warmed up to it. Every time they brought it up, I was like, yeah, no. It doesn't matter how many times you say it. I'm still not into it. And they do it in service of a certain character arc. There's a really emotional scene towards the end where a character gets to have this resolution, and I actually really liked that individual scene. It even got me a little bit teary-eyed. I think the emotional writing with these characters is really solid in this film, but I still don't think it was worth it. I don't think you needed to take that route in order to get there. I think you could have gotten there in a different way. But overall, I would say this is a worthy sequel. It did not need to exist necessarily, but the groundwork was there in the first film so that this one makes sense. It does enough different with the setting, the place that the characters are in their lives, the gore, the villain's abilities, and his demeanor. There's enough different here to where it feels like a progression, but it still feels like the same world. It feels like it fits in. Great performances, really good atmosphere. I think I like it a little more than the first one. It's close, but just the fact that this one goes a little bit bigger, feels a little more unpredictable, even though where it actually ends up is pretty predictable. During the viewing experience, just the fact that the grabber is a spirit now and we're in a different location and it feels like anything can happen, the tone of the entire thing, I might have enjoyed this one a little bit more. I think there will probably be a fairly decent distribution of people saying that it's either better or worse than the first one, but either way, if you like the first, definitely check it out. I think it's a worthy follow-up. I don't think they should do any more, and I don't think they will. I think 2 is plenty. I think that basically wraps it up. But I am glad we got this one. I enjoyed it. I wish they had done a little bit more with the story to surprise us without trying to affect the first movie's story in the way that they did, which leads me to think you should definitely stop here. You're already pushing it a little bit, but for a sequel that I didn't think needed to happen, I think they did a really solid job. I'd give it like a 7-ish out of 10, like a high 7, somewhere around there. Solid, would watch again. Might have liked it a tad bit more than the first one. But this was all just my opinion, so please leave your thoughts down in the comments, whether you agree or disagree with anything that I said. Let's talk Black Phone 2 down there. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Leave a thumbs up if you did. Subscribe if you want to see more from me, and I hope to see you next time.